far beyond the stars we can see with the naked eye. Astronomers have been studying distant worlds that may completely change our understanding of where life can exist. One of the most fascinating examples is K218b, a planet located roughly 120 light-years away. It orbits a small red dwarf star and has attracted enormous attention because observations from the James Webb Space Telescope have revealed intriguing clues in its atmosphere. When a distant planet passes in front of its star, some of the starlight travels through the planet's atmosphere before reaching our telescopes. Different gases absorb different wavelengths of light, allowing scientists to identify chemical fingerprints from incredibly far away. In observations of K218b, scientists detected familiar substances including water vapor, methane, and carbon dioxide. These chemicals alone do not prove that life exists. But researchers became especially interested in possible evidence involving dimethyl sulfide, a compound associated on Earth with biological activity. That possibility is what makes this planet so interesting. K218b is very different from Earth. It is much larger and more massive, placing it in the category known as a super-Earth. Instead of having a thin atmosphere like ours, it may possess a much thicker hydrogen-rich atmosphere. At first, that sounds like an environment where life would be unlikely. But scientists are exploring a completely different possibility. Perhaps some planets do not need to resemble Earth in order to support biological processes. The planet also lies within the region around its star where temperatures could potentially allow liquid water to exist. This region is commonly called the habitable zone. K218b completes an orbit around its star in only a few weeks because it is much closer to its relatively cool red dwarf than Earth is to the Sun. Yet the amount of energy it receives may still be compatible with conditions that allow water to remain stable. Its atmosphere could also play an important role. A thick atmosphere can redistribute energy around a planet, reducing some of the temperature differences between regions that receive different amounts of starlight. That creates an intriguing possibility: a world where the environment remains relatively stable for extremely long periods. And stability matters enormously when we talk about life. Earth has experienced countless dramatic changes throughout its history. Temperatures have shifted, continents have moved, oceans have changed, and major astronomical events have altered the conditions on the surface. But if another world can maintain suitable conditions for much longer, biological systems could have more time to develop and diversify. K218b's red dwarf star is also interesting for another reason. Red dwarfs are smaller and cooler than stars like our Sun, but they can remain active for extraordinarily long periods. That means a potentially habitable planet around such a star could, in theory, have a very long window in which biological processes might develop. There is another major mystery surrounding K218b, its possible ocean. Scientists have proposed that beneath its atmosphere, the planet could contain a large amount of water. The exact structure and conditions are still uncertain, but some models allow the possibility of a water-rich world unlike anything found in our own solar system. If such an environment exists, life would not necessarily need to live on land. Instead, biological activity could potentially occur throughout a vast aquatic environment, where chemistry, pressure, temperature, and dissolved gases create conditions completely different from those on Earth. This is where the story becomes especially fascinating. For decades, the search for extraterrestrial life has often focused on finding planets that look as much like Earth as possible. A rocky surface, moderate temperatures, a suitable atmosphere, a star similar to our Sun. But K218b challenges that simple idea. Perhaps life does not require an exact copy of Earth. Perhaps the universe has many different ways of creating environments where biology can survive. The possible detection of atmospheric compounds associated with life is therefore important, but it must be interpreted carefully. Scientists need to rule out non-biological explanations and confirm that the signals are genuinely coming from the planet's atmosphere. A single atmospheric molecule cannot, by itself, prove that an alien biosphere exists. More observations are needed. Future observations could help determine whether the suspected chemical signatures are real, how abundant they are, and whether the planet's atmosphere can produce them through ordinary geological or chemical processes. If biological activity eventually becomes the strongest explanation, the discovery would be extraordinary. It would mean that life may not be restricted to small rocky planets that resemble Earth. Instead, some of the most promising living worlds could be larger planets with thick atmospheres and enormous reservoirs of water. And that possibility would fundamentally change the way scientists search for life beyond our solar system. Because the biggest question may no longer be whether another planet looks like Earth. The real question could be much broader. Does the planet have the right But the mystery surrounding K218b goes much deeper than simply asking whether water exists there. One of the most interesting clues comes from the relationship between different gases in its atmosphere. On a lifeless planet, chemicals tend to react with one another over time and move toward a more stable state. A planet with an atmosphere containing several reactive compounds in unusual proportions could therefore be telling us something important. On Earth, biological activity constantly changes the atmosphere. Oceans, microorganisms, plants, and countless other organisms participate in chemical cycles that keep certain gases circulating. If a similar process were happening on K218b, it could explain why some of its atmospheric chemicals appear together. But there is a major challenge. Scientists must determine whether biology is actually responsible, or whether the same chemical signatures could be produced by completely non-living processes. This distinction is extremely important because astronomy often deals with evidence that is incredibly difficult to interpret. A signal can look promising without being proof. That is why researchers continue observing K218b and examining its atmosphere from different angles. If future measurements confirm the suspected compounds, scientists will be able to estimate their concentrations more accurately and compare them with different atmospheric models. The planet's unusual size also makes it particularly valuable for research. Because K218b is larger than Earth, its atmosphere can produce a stronger signal when the planet passes in front of its star. That makes it easier for powerful telescopes to study its atmospheric composition than some smaller worlds. In other words, K218b may be giving astronomers an opportunity to test techniques that could eventually be used on many other distant planets. And there could be many more targets waiting. Red dwarf stars are extremely common throughout the Milky Way. If planets around these stars can maintain suitable conditions for life, the number of potentially interesting worlds could be enormous. For a long time, some scientists were cautious about red dwarf systems because these stars can produce powerful bursts of radiation. That radiation could potentially affect planetary atmospheres and make the surface environment difficult for life. But every planetary system is different. A thick atmosphere, a large planetary mass, an ocean, or other protective mechanisms could change the outcome. This is why researchers cannot simply classify an entire group of planets as either habitable or uninhabitable. Each world has to be studied individually. K218b is especially valuable because it represents a type of planet that does not have an obvious equivalent in our own solar system. Imagine a world larger than Earth, surrounded by a deep atmosphere, potentially containing enormous amounts of water, and orbiting a star that could remain active for an extremely long period. Such a planet would challenge many of our assumptions about what a living world should look like. It also raises a fascinating question about evolution. If life emerged on a planet with stable conditions for billions of years, would it develop differently from life on Earth? We simply do not know. Earth's history has been shaped by repeated environmental changes. Life survived those changes, adapted to them, and sometimes disappeared completely before new forms eventually appeared. A more stable planet might follow a very different evolutionary path. But there is an important reality we should remember. At present, we cannot see the surface of K218b directly. We do not know exactly what its oceans, atmosphere, or potential ecosystems look like. The observations give us clues, not photographs of an alien civilization or a confirmed living ecosystem. That distinction is essential. Still, the possibility alone is scientifically powerful. Every time astronomers study a distant atmosphere, they are learning how planets behave outside our solar system. And every new discovery helps improve the methods used to search for life. The James Webb Space Telescope is particularly important because it can analyze infrared light with remarkable sensitivity. Instead of traveling to these distant worlds, scientists can study the light that passes through their atmospheres. That means a planet more than 100 light-years away can leave behind a measurable chemical fingerprint. The information is incredibly faint, but with careful observations and sophisticated analysis, researchers can begin reconstructing the chemistry of worlds that humanity may never physically visit. K218b therefore represents something larger than one unusual planet. It is part of a new era in astronomy. We are moving from simply discovering planets to studying their atmospheres, climates, and chemical environments. And eventually, scientists hope to identify atmospheric patterns that provide much stronger evidence for biological activity. The next generation of observations could be decisive. If the suspected signatures disappear with better measurements, scientists will learn something equally valuable: that nature can create surprising chemical environments without life. But if the signals remain, become stronger, and cannot be explained through known non-biological processes, the possibility of life will become much harder to dismiss. That would transform K218b from an intriguing scientific target into one of the most important worlds ever studied.